We strike balance by really understanding that before it's anything's masculine and feminine, it's human. These are human qualities and human characteristics. Masculine and feminine, the separation is really a way to actually come back into wholeness.
Today's guest is Stefanos Sifandos. He is a master coach, facilitator, author, and the co-founder of the Elementum Coaching Institute. And within this episode, we speak about masculine and feminine polarities within us and how they can impact our leadership and our embodiment. We also talk about rites of passage and other ceremonies and practices to initiate yourself into deeper embodiment, as well as how to build more powerful and transformational containers as a facilitator, coach, or even in your relationship through embracing both the masculine and feminine energetics within you. We also speak about why healing your trauma and facing your shadows is key to being in powerful leadership and many other juicy topics. Steph is a deeply wise, committed man, and I am really excited to share this episode with you. Keep on watching as we dive right into the video. Steph, thank you so much for making the time to be here in Sacred Leaders sharing today with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, such a pleasure. I have been following, as I was just saying, your work for a while, and I really love the way in which you present the feminine and masculine energies within each one of us and how to be in full embodiment and balance of those energies within. And one thing I've learned over the years is that we truly are the center point piece to each and every single piece of the puzzle that is our lives and our leadership and our businesses and all of these things. And it really all starts within. It starts within us. So since we all have masculine and feminine energies within ourselves, I would love to start with hearing from you. What's your perception or way of explaining how do we recognize and embrace both the feminine and masculine energies within us, regardless of whether we are men and women, so that we can create the context for this conversation for those that may have never heard of this concept before?
Yeah, so when explaining masculine and feminine energetics, we have this tendency to be exclusive to gender, and that's not always the case. There's definitely an element of biology that's involved in masculine and feminine energetics, and that can influence and impact what energy we bring into the world, or what, I suppose, dominant, I don't want to say archetype, but dominant, well, part of it's archetypical, right? So what dominant energetic we bring into our relationships and into the world. But it's not exclusive to gender. And so when we're looking at masculine and feminine energetics, it's just contrast. It's just contrast dynamics, polarity dynamics, sexual attraction dynamics, intimacy and relating. Contrast just helps us learn really deeply and in a rich way. And so we tend to compartmentalize because the brain does that really well. The brain likes to separate its environment, the people, the things, the relationships. Is it safe to go there? Is it unsafe? And so judging, so to speak, or compartmentalizing our reality is a very normal thing. The issue that we have in our modern world is that we judge too harsh, too quickly, and too intensely. And we say things internally, whether it's unconscious or conscious, that, oh, this person's wearing that particular garment, that means this, or this is their skin color, that means that, this is their gender, that means that. With masculine and feminine dynamics, it's really just a way to understand ourselves. Where are we more comfortable? What energetic are we more comfortable in? Are we more comfortable in being of that energetic of doing and being more active, being deliberate, goal orientation? Are we more comfortable in an energetic of observation and witnessing? Are we more comfortable in an energetic of collaboration? And that doesn't mean that if you're more comfortable in that energetic, you're going to stay there for the rest of your life. We strike balance by really understanding that before it's anything's masculine and feminine, it's human. These are human qualities and human characteristics. Masculine and feminine, the separation is really a way to actually come back into wholeness, because we then get to identify what creates greater harmony within ourselves. When we're looking at homeostasis and creating that homeostasis within ourselves, that balance, we get to explore through contrast. And so contrast is just an exploration. helps us understand ourselves better, and helps us identify this situation requires this kind of energetic. Maybe if I'm hyper, or if I'm extreme or unhealthy, or maybe shadow-like in a certain energetic, for example, I'm obsessed with goal orientation, or I'm obsessed with accomplishments, and that's coming from a wounded place because I'm still trying to unconsciously impress my father, as an example, that elusive father wound. And so I'm doing more in order to gain recognition and acceptance and approval and validation. But the place where it's coming from isn't a healthy place. It's not coming from a whole place. It's coming from a perceived to be broken place. That's an unhealthy, extreme masculine energetic, so to speak. Now that I understand that, it may help me come back into a healthy expression. What does that look like? Does that mean that I need to be more feminine? Not necessarily. It may, but not necessarily. What it means is I have to look at these wounded parts of myself. And so when we look at masculine and feminine energetics, there's unhealthy and healthy in both. And generally when we're in unhealthy, we're being extreme. In other words, we're almost like lopsided or hyper in our expression. It's like, I have a background in environmental science and ecology and so forth, as well as psychology and behavioral science and so forth. But I look at what we do in agriculture, and we destroy diverse ecology for these monostructured crops. It's not healthy for the ecosystem. That's not how we thrive in diversity, right? And so being extreme is like being almost lopsided in everything that we do. And that's not sustainable. And so coming back into harmony, we contrast and separate our experiences to actually come back into wholeness. And that's the paradox. But we get really scared really quickly because we all want to be inclusive, because we don't like being inclusive, because that, to our nervous system, that means death, or like annihilation.
Yeah.
And so we're always trying to be hyper inclusive as well. And so it would help to get beyond that and just say, okay, as a human being, what am I avoiding? What am I running from? What deep fears do I have that's causing me to be extreme in my behavior, whether it's being quote unquote too masculine or quote unquote too feminine, as an example.
Yeah, I love that. And for those listening that are maybe thinking, I hear a lot from the Tantra perspective, which I don't always resonate with fully. And then from a very analytical, more psychological perspective, what the differences between the feminine and the masculine are. What I have found within myself, or the way that I look at it and I identify it, is maybe the masculine being more one direction, goal oriented, maybe more focused, which in an extreme or maybe unbalanced way can be this overachieving, this super highly driven, just one focused way. And then the feminine being more the intuitive, feeling, emotional side of us. Do you resonate with this, or there's another way where you would explain in a very simple way for people that are hearing this concept maybe for the first time, what's my masculine side doing, or how does it feel, and what's my feminine side doing, or how does it feel, for people to start identifying those energies within them?
Yeah, that's not how you've expressed it. I can definitely resonate with that. Michaela Boehm speaks to the energetics of being and doing, go and flow, passive, active. And so again, it's two wings of the same bird, two sides of the same coin. One doesn't exist without the other. That's a more than adequate way to look at that, and just to look at the areas of your life where you feel you're paying too much attention. There's other areas of your life that you're not. So for example, are you being too active? Are you working 18, 20 hours a day? How sustainable is that? Is there any room for passivity there? Is there any room for being observant and just being in that space? That can help that rest and replenish. Like action or activity or taking action is considered a masculine characteristics. And all of these are just characteristics. Like you can group all these characteristics in separate areas of masculine and feminine, but at the end of the day, they're all human constructs, right? Yeah. But are you doing too much, and are you not being enough? Are you taking too much action and not resting? And the reality is that all action stems from passivity. The root of all action is passivity. And you got to sit with that for a moment, because you can't take action without being empty first. It's the emptiness that drives you towards action. Or it's the emptiness that drives a thought or an inclination that then drives action. But the inclination or the thought or the motivation or the inspiration comes from space and emptiness. You look at how Newton developed his idea of physics, or how he recognized what's happening in the world. You look at how Einstein, it's just two examples and there's many out there, Nikola Tesla, it came from deep contemplation in space And there could have been micro moments of space before an afflatus or an idea came to them that they then took action on. And so we can't be with one without being with the other. It's a fallacy.
Yeah.
And this is what I really advocate, is that we're different. Men and women are different. Full fucking stop. That's okay. No big deal. We're also super similar. We're really similar. That's okay as well. We need to celebrate the differences and celebrate the similarities and play in each other's strengths. And also then within the microcosm of self, within the individual, where I'm going to be proficient at certain things, I'm not going to be so proficient at other things. It doesn't mean I can't try or can't develop acuity in that area. It just means that whilst I'm learning or growing, I can have someone else show me and compliment me in that way, whilst I can become maybe proficient in that area. Can we be proficient at everything? Maybe, I don't know. Do we need to be? It can help, but it's not completely necessary. We're relational beings. So let's rely on each other a little more, not be codependent on each other, but be interdependent with each other and start to learn and grow in that way. I think that's a more empowered and consciousness expanding approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I know that you are feminine and masculine expert, as you call yourself, but also a loving relationship coach. And I was having a conversation with a brother of mine the other day. He was asking me, he's running his first retreat, and he was saying, what's your take on how to create a powerful healing container? And I reflected back at him that for me, the understanding of feminine and masculine, even if it's just to use it in that context, really helps me, because I see it the same way that I see it in a relationship, right? If the man, let's say, it's really anchored and really present, then the feminine can really, or the women in this case, can surrender a lot more into her feminine and into her vulnerability, feel a lot safer. So when building containers, I see that as a way of also creating a solidity through the masculine direction and the focus, and having a really clear end goal to what wants to be created in that space, and to certain organization and certain guidelines that can create a solid container, so that then the feminine energy, the healing, the intuitive responding to what's present in that moment in each container can happen. So I know you run many workshops and you work with different men's work, but also inner child healing and relationship and all the things. And I'm just curious to see, or to hear from you, if you see this playing out as well, the feminine and masculine energies within a container when we're building something in regards to our leadership and the workshops and the retreats that we may lead. How do we connect to those energies in an expanded way, like you were just sharing, to create something that has that safety baseline, so that the healing and the transformation can be taken a lot further?
I think it's very important to heal our trauma and do our shadow work and look at our pains of the past and the fears that we've developed as we've grown through our trauma, because it remains with us. And most people, most children have experienced some level of trauma. Yeah. And so we have to create a sense of safety within ourselves. And again, that trauma opens us up to feeling unsafe and then becoming either hyper protective or hyper passive, where we withdraw from the world. And so again, if we're looking at being hyper protective and being aggressive, oppressive and subjugating, these can be considered extreme masculine traits. Healthy masculine traits of leadership in that sense is not being oppressive, but rather being empowered, rather being inspired, rather leading, not so much through collaboration, but through consultation. Collaboration is more of the realm of the feminine, considered anyway. Again, these are just human traits at the end of the day, but working through our trauma, that may be a trauma that's overt, or our, such as sexual abuse, physical abuse, a one-off event such as being in war or whatever it may be, a kidnapping or a car accident. And then the not so obvious trauma that we experience, because this affects our bodies and our brains and our nervous system and the way we see ourselves and the way that we relate sexually, the way that we relate intimately, and what's happening in our brains. Like the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex is overloaded, right? And this traumatic stress that we experience that we haven't dealt with, it impacts the way we relate sexually. It impacts the way we give and receive love. It influences the way we show up to relationship, how much we trust, how vulnerable we can be. Because if we're not vulnerable, we're not allowing others to trust us. You see, childhood trauma affects the way our neural pathways form and don't form. And so if we have and our belief system, if we have an idea that, or a belief that people are unsafe or men are unsafe, then we'll carry that unconsciously and or consciously into every relationship. So we won't get close to people. We won't allow people to feel us. Mm-hmm. And that's that we're going to develop a sense of self-worth that is lowered, maybe that we're not good enough, or that people are unsafe, or that people can't be trusted. Mm-hmm. And then what happens? Well, we revert to old coping strategies. We revert to being reactive to try and keep ourselves really safe. And we always, well, not always, but we often look outside of ourselves to blame. Mm-hmm. Because that's easy, that easy scapegoat. It's easier to blame someone else than to blame ourselves. It's easier to say that person's unsafe or that situation's unsafe, as opposed to looking at self and making changes within self, because the brain doesn't like unfamiliar circumstances. Mm-hmm. It likes to remain in what's familiar, even though that repetitive pattern may not be the healthiest of patterns. And so then there's no sacredness in our relationships, right? There's no sense of unity consciousness. There's no sense of deep opening. Mm-hmm. That's an issue.
Yeah, for sure. And it definitely is easier because when we blame others, there's no responsibility to be taken. There's nothing that we need to do. So we can just remain in that victim seat while everything and everyone is the reason why things are happening, without really having to look at the homework that we get to do. I know that safety has been a big thing for me, like huge thing for me to work through. And that showed up a lot in my leadership. There was such a deep desire for me to serve and to support humanity. And I'm literally obsessed with the idea of liberating humanity from suffering and having a world where everyone strikes a chance and we live in harmony with the earth and with one another. And it's something that's always been in my mind, very, very present. And yet my lack of feeling safe around people created that kind of wall where it's like, I'll pray for you, I'll work my ass so that I can really help as many people as I can, but until here. So I'm curious to hear what's something that you would recommend for people listening to this that they can start doing to build that sense of safety within, to stop outsourcing that sense of safety, which is when X person does this and when X person says this, then I will be safe, then I'll open up. How can we start cultivating that sense of safety within?
Yeah, for sure. So, essentially I'm hearing you say, how do we feel safe, and how do we heal from our trauma, that we can, whatever that trauma may be, or whatever that pain may be, that we can then be more open in the world. So it's going to require some deliberate action. I think it really begins with support, seeking professional help and support groups, even if it's just friends and family. How we diffuse shame is by speaking it or communicating it openly into the world. And that diffuses shame. So we don't want to isolate ourselves, because that just perpetuates isolation and a broken sense of self. We want to face our stuff. We don't want to avoid it. So you don't want to go to cigarettes and alcohol and pornography and sex and food and workaholism and excessive achievement and status and material wealth and all those things, right? We don't want to go to distractions. We want to feel the big feelings in a safe place. And so you have to have support in order to do that. You can journal, you can practice mindfulness, exercise and move your body. All of these things help. Other self-care practices, whatever they may be, taking a bath, creating space in your day and your week to be in nature, having healthy evening and morning routines, because this provides structure, and the structure is again that symbolic of the masculine, and that the structure can hold you in your life, and that can be really endearing and empowering. Actively practicing gratitude, appreciation, and celebration. Celebrate your wins, celebrate what you enjoy doing every morning and every evening. Don't only list 3 things that you're grateful for, but really embody those things as well. Practicing giving is a beautiful, empowering practice, because we receive so much when we give, and we're able to connect and communicate with people at a deeper level. Listen to healing music, practice stillness and meditation and mindfulness. Trauma release exercise, emotional release exercise, whether that look like primal screaming or anger release techniques, whatever it may be, to shift the feeling of I don't feel safe and feeling that you can't explore, again, it's really empowering to do that with a practitioner, a guide, a coach, a shaman, a
Yes,
spiritual
of
teacher,
course.
someone that can really see you and hear you and hold you through all of that.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. And what I have found in my journey as well is that it takes that accountability, that level of self accountability to really see, as I said earlier, that you are the center point to each and every piece. So is it really true that everything out there is unsafe, or is your brain wired in a way due to the trauma, due to the certain experiences, that is looking for confirmation and proof that you are not safe? Can you change the story? Can you start looking for proof that maybe you have been safe all along? Maybe not towards the places that you were looking at, not in the circumstances that you found yourself maybe disempowered, but there's always been a level of that, and that's always been available. So yeah, that's definitely powerful. And I have listened to a couple of podcasts where you were the guest and you were sharing a little bit about your story and your own personal journey to finding a sense of healthy masculinity, to heal your own trauma and the reasons why you were in that unbalanced masculine. If we keep on driving it in the masculine and feminine aspects, I guess, as we said, we all have them within. But I know that this shows up a lot for people that maybe want to lead and they want to support others, they want to be of service, and maybe they want to create successful businesses and be in leadership and all of these things, but their own lack of embodiment and their own lack of integrity with their healing and their journey gets in the way. So I'm curious to know how do you see these showing up with the people that you work, where they may keep focusing on the marketing or the brand strategy or all of the business things related, thinking that's going to get them the success that they want, without realizing that it's their own inner alignment that will bring what they desire.
Yeah, so essentially it's disempowering ourselves when we distract ourselves. And if we're distracting ourselves from feeling big feelings, we're not clearing ourselves, and we're just placing band-aid solutions over pain that we may be experiencing. There's nothing wrong with the success. There's nothing wrong with creating multi-billion-dollar, trillion-dollar industries or businesses. There's nothing wrong with serving 10,000, 100,000, a million, 10 million, 100 million, a billion people. All of that is fantastic. It's looking at what's our come from. For me personally, a lot of those big dreams I had when I was younger, I still have very similar dreams. They haven't really changed, but the come from has changed. It's not coming from a place of not enough or coming from a place of less than or needing to prove myself. Because the energy that was fueling that, the intention that was fueling that, was really driven through fear and desperation and not enough, low self-worth. And so for me, I had to really transition from being an unhealthy man, an unhealthy masculine man, into a healthy masculine man. And I had to face some really harsh realities around how I was behaving and being in the world and how I was showing up in my relationships and what was driving me. I wasn't being driven by this desire to inspire others. I was really, when I peeled it back, I was being driven to feel worthy, to feel enough, to the unconscious, unresolved, or the unconscious validation I was seeking and approval I was seeking from my father, and the unconscious, unresolved wounds that were driving my need to impress others, to inflate my ego, to feel better about myself. And often spiritual teachers will speak to ego disillusion. I think one of the really important points that are missed there is that we have to integrate our ego before we dissolve it. Otherwise, we feel more lost and more fragmented within ourselves. And the integration piece is working with a shadow, is feeling those big feelings, is being in enough humility to have healthy expressions for those big feelings. There's the fear, the anger, the rage, and many men experience that. And one of the ways that healthy men or men become healthy is taking themselves through traditional rites of passage. Now, I'm talking about rites of passage that are happenstance, such as, now you're allowed to drink alcohol. Now you get your driver's license. Now, you finish high school. They're important in our world, and they count for something, but they're not deliberate enough, and they're not of deep substance. And rites of passage, men need rites of passage. For women, it's very distinct, the rite of passage. It's a physical transition from girlhood to womanhood through the menstrual cycle. It's very distinct. Men don't have that. Yes, we go through our hormonal growth, and puberty and so forth, as do women, but we don't have that sharp, distinct growth phase. And so men really require, and ancient tribes are all around the world, and anthropology demonstrates this, cultural mythologists such as Joseph Campbell demonstrate this. We see that men need those cultural rites of passage. They need guidance from other men because they're a familiar source of inspiration, potential inspiration. We need challenge. We need to earn our transitions. We need to endure and witness ourselves moving through great difficulty and experiencing that, and then immersing into a new version of self, being witnessed by other men, and the confirmation of that. So there's a lot of power in that.
Mm-hmm.
And so rites of passage are really important for people, for men particularly, that are wanting to, and even women as well, by the way, deliberate rites of passage, intentional rites of passage, where people are wanting to transition from an old self to a new version of self that's not relying on distractions, again, such as pornography, sex, food, alcohol, overworking, to compensate for their lack of feeling connected to their soul's purpose or to their ultimate truth.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I've been for many years been working really deeply with plant medicines and with teachers from different ancient traditions and cultures. And in the Mexica tradition that I've been learning through working with the medicine of peyote, they do these rites of passage in many different ways in order to initiate men and women into that level of ownership and understanding of who we truly are. Not who we are in society, but who we truly are. And it comes through the endurance, as you said, of situations that are quite challenging in a physical, in an emotional, in a spiritual level. And I was actually going to start, before everything with COVID happened, I was going to start my Vision Quest journey, which is a 4-year commitment where you go for 3 nights, 4 days. Well, for 4 days you go, there's no water, no food, and you're alone in the mountain. And then there's a shaman that's guiding the whole experience and supporting you. And I remember when I first decided this, I thought to myself, well, this makes sense for men. This makes sense for men to find their endurance and all of that. But what I realized is that for us women as well, there is, even though we have that quote unquote rites of passage through getting our periods and starting to bleed in that way, the body is guiding us into that rites of passage. There is a big lack of embodiment in our society because we don't understand. Nobody's teaching us what it truly means to be a man or to be a woman, right? So you get old enough, and like you said, maybe you finish high school or you are allowed to drive or to drink, and then that's it, you're an adult, and go out there in the world and figure it out. But nobody's really teaching us, okay, what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a man? How can we be an embodiment and understanding of who we are? And so I totally agree that rites of passage are really, really powerful. And I wonder if you have done any of those journeys, or if you have created any of those experiences for yourself or your clients. For people listening that might be, well, that's awesome, but I don't know any Mexica teacher. I'm not connected with a Peruvian shaman. How do I go about doing a rite of passage for myself? Do you have any practices or anything that you've done in order to do that transition?
Yeah, many. And so to answer your 2 questions both, so I've done vision quests in my past as well, through various traditional lineages, and I've created my own for myself. Mm-hmm. And I have also created for others as well. And I've developed a journey program, a journey for fathers and boys that I work closely with. And you know, the advice that I would give to people that are starting out on their own vision quest is start very simple. You know, firstly, trust that if it's something that really is attractive to you and you're being called, it will come into your life. I remember when I made a decision a couple of years ago to really work with a shaman, literally that man showed up in my reality a week later. And I work with an intuitive, and she described this man, and I was like, this is so strange. I mean, I don't know anyone like that. She went into a lot of detail. Literally, he starts unpacking his story, And I'm looking at my wife, Christine, she was there, and I told her that story of the intuitive. And we're looking at each other going, what the fuck is going on? Like, it was really profound. And so these people will show up in your life when you commit to it, because you're ready for that next level. But I would say this: get comfortable being in nature. Go for a day walk. I wouldn't say deprive yourself of food and water, or abstain from food and water. If, seek professional guidance on that. People are different. Yes. I'm very accustomed to fasting. I've been doing it for many, many years. Lengthened water fast, dry fast, all of that. So it's something that's very familiar to me. It doesn't scare me. It did initially. I mean, it didn't scare me, but I was apprehensive. But it's taken me years, and I still have longer to go as well. However, go for a walk in nature for a day. Go for a day hike. Maybe at some point you'll do an overnight. Maybe you'll minimize your food. Maybe you'll minimize your water. Maybe you'll just bring water and not much food. Maybe you'll bring some backup food. Maybe you'll just do something adventurous for yourself, but that's more in solitude. I think in solitude, I'm very certain of this from my own personal experience. In solitude, we experience, and that's part of the rites of passage for people, we experience great depth of clarity in solitude and growth. We get to become acquainted with all of who we are, and that's the whole point. But the flip side to that is that it's also very scary, because all of that which we are, some of it is quote unquote ugly, not attractive, very dense, very dark, very confronting. All the parts that society says push away and shun, and that's not a healthy behavior to have, but that's part of who we are. And so being in solitude, it brings all of that stuff to the surface. That's why we're always busying ourselves. Yeah. So I make a permanent practice to create space in my day to just sit and observe, whether it's an expansive view, or sit and just stare at a wall, or sit and stare at the back of my eyelids, whatever it may be. Just be in stillness. It's a very important practice. That's part of my daily practice.
I love that. Yes. And I was actually speaking to my parents about this last week. We were talking about different practices like this, like Vision Quest, and they were asking me about Temazcal and what it was. And I said, out of all the amazing things that I've gotten from this journey, and all the healing and all the deep insights and the wisdom that you receive and all of the things, the biggest thing that I see I've received is that warrioress training, this understanding that we are incredibly resilient beings. And that although we live in a society where everything seems to be so comfortable and instant, like you want water, you open the tap. You want to speak to someone in Texas, you just press a button and there you go. It's like everything is so easy, but that in a way, I feel like we've traded freedom for comfort. So we are so imprisoned within the confines of our own perceptions, because we haven't given ourselves the opportunity and the chance to really look beyond that. Who are we when we don't have all of the comforts and the things that we've so hard working towards and all of that? So I feel like having that time with ourselves is, as you said, challenging, and it can be definitely ugly, but it's completely necessary. And even more with all of the things that have been happening this year, I feel like humanity is really yearning for a change, and it's really yearning for us to really get clear on the things that we've been saying yes to because it was comfortable, because it was easy, or it was the norm, and really redefine what we want. And I feel like that's needed in order to be in embodied leadership. We have to go into those places. One thing you said that I find very potent and powerful as well, very important, is to understand that definitely will get ugly, that there's so many things that we will see within ourselves that are deemed in our society as bad or wrong or not honorable, not noble. What I have found within my own journey, and I'm curious to hear how it's been for you, is that doing this work, it gets a lot easier when you're doing it guided by someone or supported by someone that has gone through that journey already and have gotten to an understanding that it is okay. For instance, the shaman that I've been apprenticing with for years, she has gotten to a point within herself where she says, there's nothing more mature, enlightened, spiritual, conscious you can ever possibly do than know and accept yourself. And just know that everything that you go through, every little ugly, messy, whatever beat, it's okay. And as long as you stop fighting it, then that is it. That really is it. So yeah, I'm curious to know how it's been for you to really get to accept and love those ugly, uncomfortable beats.
it's been a journey, and it continues to be a journey, and it's very challenging, and it brings a great deal of pain to the surface at times.
Yeah.
I completely resonate with what your shaman has expressed, because there's some deep truth in that. And I think modern science, modern medicine, modern psychology, the psychonaut of the modern era, the explorer of consciousness, can take a leaf out of the book of shamanism and traditional medicine people, because there is something there that if we compartmentalize ourselves and avoid the painful or undesirable experiences such as rage or anger or jealousy or sadness and grief, whatever it may be, then we're really fracturing ourselves and we're compartmentalizing ourselves as people. And what happens in modern psychology or the consciousness movement, the spiritual teacher movement, is that there are so many individuals that haven't faced their own stuff, and they're attempting to teach people and help people through their own stuff. Right now, the conversation around that could be, well, every great coach doesn't necessarily have to be a great athlete. And that's very true. However, in this realm where we're confronting and dealing with really big stuff, that level of self-acceptance, two things. Firstly, we think self-acceptance and surrender is resignation. And so we defer from it because it's not acceptable, right? It's not deemed to be a high level quality. But the second thing is that we're attempting to take people through their own trauma and their own pain, and we haven't been there ourselves. That person feels that in their nervous system, and that just deepens their own trauma, because now they can't trust. One of the greatest things that we can do for other human beings and ourselves is loving presence, radical acceptance, three of the things: loving presence, radical acceptance, and empathetic resonance. Yeah. And the shaman, the traditional shaman, the ancient wisdom that moves through him or her does that. Yeah. And they hold that energetic beautifully. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that inspires me deeply. And that's what really got me through. I remember many times throughout my life where I've been in very, very dark places, suicidal, in deep pain and darkness. And I said to myself, and this is what got me through, I said, I've got three choices. I either end up in a mental asylum, I end up committing suicide, or I get through this and maybe I inspire others, and more importantly, I inspire myself to keep growing and expanding. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'm able to impart this wisdom and hold for others as well. I never gave myself a choice of giving up. I mean, obviously I fluxed in and out of that, but that wasn't a quote unquote permanent choice for me. And I really believe that when we do that deep work, we become more integrated and embodied, and we're able not to save other people, because it's not about that. That's disillusional and
it's just another ego trip.
Yeah. But we can hold for others. Mm-hmm. We can just be ourselves in a non-threatening way, and they then feel safe to express their trauma, and they're not going to be judged. They're not going to feel criticized, because we're not judging them, because we've been there. We get it. We feel it. And that's how we grow together. And then we're teaching each other and we're sharing. I think that's really missing in today's world, particularly in the spiritual community.
Yeah.
And I think we have an opportunity to shift that and change that by not spiritually bypassing, by owning our stuff. And it's really difficult. I get that. Mm-hmm. And just being more open with ourselves and with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I want to share a realization I had last week, because I'd love to hear your perspective on this. I went through just like a few weeks of really deep, intense pain with things that were showing up in my relationship. And I was really going for it. And because of the work I've done and my commitment to just freeing myself from anything that's bullshit, I was really in it. I wanted to just really go deeper and deeper. And this may sound woo to some people, but I've always had this feeling that I'm like, in this lifetime, I'll awaken. I'm like freedom it doesn't go after this lifetime, like it's happening. And I had this realization that somehow I had this idea, almost like awakening or becoming fully free would come, when I was a grandma, after I had grandchildren and I could go just live in the mountain and dance with the spirits and do woo-woo, super woo-woo stuff. Then I will awaken then. No? Like I'll stop suffering then. I'll stop buying into my bullshit stories then. And something really clicked last week when I was really in this space of like, man, how can this happen over and over again, right? I've done so much work on myself. I've looked at myself so deeply, and yet there are stories that I've been hearing for decades and they're still repeat in my head. So something really clicked for me, and I was like, actually, I gotta awaken now. Like, it doesn't make any sense for me not to. And obviously, I don't know what will happen, and it's a journey, and it will be forever a journey. However, I took a whole next level of self-responsibility for like, wait, like, yes, it's cool not to spiritual bypass and not to pretend like certain wounds and certain stories aren't there. However, there's a very fine line between spiritual bypassing and trauma indulging, like really indulging in the stories and the wounds. And I got to a point where I was like, wait a second, Sigrid, like this story of abandonment and rejection and lack of safety, like, you've heard it, you've looked at it, you've cried for it, you've purged it in ceremony, like you've gone into it. For how long more will you allow for it to have that level of power, right? So I would love to hear from your experience, what's that line between quote unquote spiritual bypassing, pretending like our traumas and our wounds aren't there, and then maybe recycling the wounds and going almost like giving them a level of allowance that it's getting in the way of us just breaking free from certain stories.
Well, there is a fine line, and we are addicted to our stories because they're familiar, and the brain loves familiarity because it feels safe. And the main prerogative of the brain, it's a couple, but essentially it's to feel safe.
Yeah.
It's to be safe and continue life for as long as possible in the most optimal way possible. So yes, we're pleasure-seeking beings, and at the same time, we become addicted to our stories and our patterns because they form our identity. And the complexity of society that we live in, identity is everything. Our self-worth, our sense of belongingness, our connection and intimacy to self and others is predicated on our self-worth, but our self-identity. And sometimes, this is what the ego death is known as, is dissolving the identity. Yeah. But that can be very scary. And so we can become addicted, and we can become addicted in a couple of ways. We either keep replaying out our trauma bonds, or we spiritually bypass. But what we're doing is, in both circumstances, in both instances, what we're doing is essentially just playing out those same stories. Because they keep feeding into it. Even the spiritual bypassing, we're bypassing something that is reoccurring. So we have to keep bypassing it. The bypass is a product of not facing our stuff, obviously, right? It's a redundant statement, so to speak, but the bypass keeps us going on to the next month, 2 months, 6 months of, oh, everything's great, everything's okay, but it's superficial. It's not real per se. It's not substantial. And then come around again, or we have to go into that bypass. So we're not so much addicted to even our trauma, we're addicted to the coping strategy. We're addicted because the coping strategy feels really good. It's that dopamine hit, it's that feeling of accomplishment. And so we become neurologically, behaviorally, emotionally, relationally addicted to the coping strategy, whether it's spiritual bypassing or whether it's playing, wearing our wounds as a badge of honor. I'm guilty for both in different stages of my life. Yes. Because then I'm worthy. The harder my life is and the more I can get through it, look at me, look how strong and tough I am. I'm now valuable. Look at me, give me attention, give me love. It's the old childhood stuff, right? And so at some point we have to be self-assured enough to let that shit go. And one of the ways we do that, and there are many, I'll come back to rites of passage and solitude. Being in our own space, being comfortable in our own skin, not being over-reliant on things and people and relationships and how people see us and perceive us to guide how we see and perceive ourselves, moving away from codependence. And that requires going into those old mother and father wounds and those old childhood stories or traumas, or the bullying that we experienced, or the teacher not thinking that we're good enough and picking on us, whatever perceptions or reality that was unpacked in particularly our childhood during our formative years, that really forms strong entrenched bonds in our brain and body. That's the shit we've got to deal with. And again, we've got to be careful not to just keep dealing with our shit. We have to give ourselves space and reprieve to actually celebrate. Look at a video game. At the end of every level, you beat the big bad guy or girl, or you beat the big enemy, and the game says, congratulations, celebrate, you're now moving to the next level. You're now moving to level 2. You've passed level 1. Take a moment to celebrate. Yes, I celebrated. I'm excited. I got level 2, new bad people, new challenges, new superpowers. I'm fucking excited. And you get to level 2 and it's harder. It's more difficult and you get frustrated. But then you get through level 2 and the video game says, congratulations, you just made it to level 3. Take a moment to celebrate. We've got to take a moment to celebrate. Like, create that space, whether that's a 30 seconds, a minute, 10 years, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But we've got to find that balance, right? And we don't do that enough. And if we're talking masculine and feminine energies, that celebration, that full immersion into life, into the goodness that is life, the dancing, the soul connection, the connection to earth and groundedness, the good food, the intimacy, the love, the fluidity of sharing that love, that's feminine energy. That's being in the body, right? We don't take many moments to celebrate that because we're so in the masculine, but in unhealthy states of the masculine, where we're hyper focused on external achievements that we forget to be embodied.
Yeah. And
so, you know, we've got to be careful. Awareness is key. It's not the only thing. If awareness was all there is, you know, the world would be a very different place. Awareness is a stepping stone to higher consciousness, but it is a starting point, and it's an important one as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I love what you just said about the masculine and feminine energies in that way playing out. I see it as within that realm of masculine and feminine, like sometimes, and I had a client ask me something around this last week or the week before, and she was like, okay, so how do I be firm in the understanding that I don't want to keep on buying into certain stories while not spiritual bypassing? And what I said in that moment was something like, you know, the masculine might be that direction and that boundary where we're like, yo, this story, I have already consciously and intentionally chosen that it's not true. I actually don't want to keep repeating and believing that story because it's not serving me. But then being tuned into the feminine, that will tell us, the body will tell us when there's something to process. Sometimes I feel like we listen too much to the mind and to the story, not allowing ourselves to be in the somatic experience of what needs to be processed. So sometimes we want to process things that have already been processed, but like you said, it's familiar. It creates a thought habit. So it's something that we just keep indulging in versus allowing ourselves to remain open and available to whatever needs to be processed through the body somatically. If we need to cry, if we need to shake, if we need to whatever it is. And also having that boundary within our minds where it's like, actually, I've decided that story is not serving me, so I'm not going to keep on buying into it. There is something else that I thought earlier when we were speaking about the healthy masculinity and finding that within yourself as a man. I know that, as I said, again, I'll repeat myself, we are the center point to each and every single piece of our lives, right? And sometimes I find that when it comes to leadership and entrepreneurship, people find it harder to see themselves in certain habits or patterns because sometimes we surround ourselves by people that won't reflect that back at us, or we create that persona on social media and in our professional networking where we are always on point, we always have it all together. And it's easy to just hide from ourselves in that position of the power pedestal kind of thing, right? When we come into relationships, I find that there is no hiding. And what I have found very interesting is that I learn a lot about myself and apply that to my leadership through my relationship. So I'm curious to hear, what are some maybe clues, just like they say, success leaves clues. I feel like misalignment leaves clues as well. What are some clues, that behaviors or triggers that may come up in relationship for your clients, things that you see often, that can be an indicator that there's some work that you get to do that will in turn help you be in more powerful leadership?
Yeah, hyper competitiveness with your partner, constant frustration, agitation with your partner, avoiding conflict or avoiding arguments or avoiding difference of opinion, being hyper aggressive, not being considerate, not asking questions of your partner, being selfish in relationship, behaving in a way of either it's you or them, that you're feeling like it's that energy of what can I get from this? What can I take from this? What can I have from this? Very little, I'm not a big fan of the word compromise, but we'll use the word because it will make more sense, but very little compromise in the relationship. So very little empathy, compassion, understanding, hearing the person, being in very, very different values. And that's not a bad thing, being in different values, but how you deal with that can be an indication of, if you're being triggered by that, then hey, maybe, and you're consistently choosing people that are very different in your value set, what's important to you, how you want to live your life, what your non-negotiables are. That can be important. If your sexual love languages or your sexual intimate languages are very, very different, and that's a constant thing. If you're attracting unavailable people, physically, emotionally, whatever that looks like, these are indicators that you probably have some work to do, and that they do as well. And it's an opportunity, right? I think most people leave a relationship very early. So if we're talking masculine and feminine dynamics, the unhealthy masculine will leave the relationship very early because the dominant masculine energetic thrives in freedom. And when there's conflict or tension or doesn't like something, masculine's out of there. The feminine stays too long. The unhealthy feminine generally stays too long in relationship, because that feminine wants to hold on, wants to experience the love, is waiting for that, is predicating the entire existence on that. And when I say her, I don't mean a woman. It can be a man as well. It depends what the embodiment of the energetic is. But generally, the wounded self will leave a relationship or not address the issues in the relationship too early. So won't address them at all or too late, and will either leave the relationship too early. But either way, not address them, right? Just does it in different ways. And when we look at males and females, even from a trauma response or nervous system function, men tend to physically leave the situation that's dangerous. So they'll fight or flight. Women in their nervous system, again, everyone's different. So this is not a generalization, but there's something to this, that women will remain in that trauma for longer, but shut down internally. And these are evolutionary functions, right? So they'll freeze or fold more so. But again, men freeze or fold. I spent most of my life freezing and folding as a young person. As an adult and as a teenager, it was more fight or flight, but it was very overt and aggressive when I was in a trauma response. But I also purposely put myself in those places because that's how I define myself and my worth, fighting and winning fights and being aggressive and being powerful and all of that. Being controlling and scaring people and demanding respect and fear. And so it was just a different way of being. But ultimately I feel I've answered, gone into some of the ways that we can be unhealthy in relationship. And it's a sign that, hey, we have an opportunity to actually grow together here and not heal each other, but be healing points and road, like sign maps what's the word I'm looking for? Signposts on our map, right? To help us navigate the murky waters of repetitive, unhealthy behavior.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. There's 2 more questions I want to ask you, Steph. The first thing, how can people find you, and in what ways can people work with you if they want to deepen into this work? That's one huge water bottle.
It's a gallon, yeah. So thank you for asking that question. You can go to growwithsteph.com, growwithsteph.com. That's not my main website, but there's a heap of free stuff there. Information you can apply to work with me directly. You can look at all the programs, or some of the programs that I have available. You can access my social media from there as well. Instagram is or Facebook or YouTube or whatever all that is at Stefanos Sifandos. At Stefanos Sifandos.
Yeah, I'll leave all of these in the show notes as well.
Of course.
Awesome. Thank you. And the last question is, in your opinion, what makes a leader sacred?
Willingness to listen, willingness to traverse one's own fears, willingness to celebrate, willingness to do the things that most people don't want to do, willingness to not be so polarized in the view of themselves or others, to be able to embrace criticism, not to necessarily take it per se or just minimize oneself with it, but to be able to genuinely keep rolling with the punches. Willingness for me is a fundamental in any intimate relationship with self or with others, and any leadership position. And that requires courage. And in order to practice courage and put that forward into the world, one must really deepen their connection to the whole of who they are. That includes the good stuff and the quote unquote bad stuff, the shadow work and everything else in between.
Yes, love that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here and just making the time to share with my listeners, but also thank you for all the work that you're doing, the work that is seen on social media and the website and all that, and the work that isn't seen, but I can really feel the depth of the work that you do. So really appreciating and thanking that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening, watching, all of the things. Leave all of the details in the show notes. And thanks again, Steph. I hope you enjoyed this video and got lots of value from it. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for many more value-packed free videos, and share this with anyone in your life who can also get value from it. If you want to get access to all of my free resources and connect, check out the links in the caption. Thank you again, and I will see you on the next video.